I think the church has to look different in the 21st century.
People aren't asking us, is it true? They're saying, are we real?
I don't want to bury the gospel in a set of programs that might get in the way, that might not relate to people from my culture.
There was a gospel that somehow asked us to all check our generation at the door rather than to be who we are.
We have so much separated ourselves from the cultures we're in as the church, and it's time for us to get out of our bunkers.
We're going to have to live the gospel rather than attract people to something that we don't have anyway.
I think for a church to be gospel-centered in this century really means that you've got to have a whole lot more confidence in the power of the gospel, that it's not just powerful because we say it, or powerful because people come to hear you talk about it, but it's powerful because it changes a person.
We found the idea that what speaks to the culture isn't necessarily a programmatic, entertainment-driven kind of church, but rather a church that represents Jesus well.
If we don't embody truth as reality in how we live, it doesn't matter if we can articulate it and make it something that's outside of us. We're this kind of person trying to become this isn't very inviting. It's when we already are what we're inviting people to be that somehow they see it as reality, we see it as living out truth.
It seems like there was a schism between the liberal church who did the hands and feet side of the gospel and the conservative church who preached the gospel, and we really felt the call to bring it together, where you see Jesus going, I have compassion on these people, I'm going to feed them. I have compassion on these people, I'm going to teach them. And so for us, it became imperative to go, how do we represent that whole gospel to the city?
Christ came and proclaimed the good news of the kingdom, and it wasn't necessarily that you were just going to be saved from hell, but it was that you were going to live a new kind of life, and he was bringing that to the masses, to the people. And so living a gospel-centered and being a gospel-centered church is really being Christ to the people.
It's just asking the question, what do people around me need? And we're not going to go love them as a bait and switch to get them to come to church. We're just going to go love them.
There's good news, and the good news doesn't just get communicated in words, but it gets demonstrated in action. So good news looks like me helping my neighbor when they're in need, or good news looks like great art because it displays the Creator. Good news looks like being able to restore things or bring redemption to things that seem to be broken or have lost their value in some way or another.
The only way we'll ever have anything in common is if we check our differences at the door. So whether that is differences in age or differences by cultural distinctives, we're trying to figure out what does it look like to have a gospel that has different flavors to it, but it's the same essence. The gospel is not an affinity group. So the gospel isn't 18-year-olds, it's not 20-somethings, it's not 30-somethings. We have a church where people that make their own choices to come are under 20. And people that are making their own choices to come are over 80.
Because of the Spirit's power within them, because of God's work in them to change them and transform them, they become, as it were, like Christ, who says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And they're able to say, if you've seen us, you've seen what Jesus is doing in us. That He is changing us, that He is making us new, that He's transforming us from glory to glory, as Paul puts it. And that becomes gospel.
We want to see them come to Christ, but we're not doing it to grow the church numerically or any of that. We're just saying, this is what Jesus thinks about you.
Those things grip our heart and change the way we live. And I think then the power of the gospel is that it is transforming lives. And the transformation of a life or the transformation of a culture becomes a demonstration of God's power to bring change and restoration to people and to communities.